Up her, y'all make some noise for Amina Aweis.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me, by the way? Fantastic, fantastic. Just give me a second. I just want to hydrate. I'm not used to this heat wave. Just going to put this here. Just give me 2 seconds to just set up. Thank you.
Yes.
Perfect. How is everyone? It's Friday. How are you all doing?
Doing good, let's
Yeah? Friday night, woo! Let's go. So, hi everyone. My name is Amina. I am a developer, a content creator, and accessibility advocate, and I'm also the founder of RecipeMate It, where we're tackling inaccessible food recipes for the disabled community and bridging the gap between food shopping and cooking independently with confidence. If you want to check me out, I am on Twitter and LinkedIn. So, when it comes to accessibility, we tend to link it to disability and just focusing on the minority. But actually, the aim of web accessibility is as many as possible according to their needs. Users need options. They need ways to access the web and to do so fairly with equity. So that's always the aim of web accessibility. Another thing is that usability is actually interlinked with accessibility. Oftentimes we try to separate the two because we don't realize that great user experience is often linked with prioritizing accessibility. A good example of this is the Apple Watch. There are a lot of features on the Apple Watch that were intentionally designed for users who have motor impairments, but we love them so much that we still continue to use it, and Apple Watches are popular. Prioritizing accessibility allows for you to streamline your product market fit, which I will talk about as a founder later on. Push for meaningful systemic change, because accessibility and the lack of it is how society is shaped and how we communicate with each other. So prioritizing accessibility allows you to do some meaningful change with that. And also in the workplace, it promotes meaningful and agile methodologies, which tends to get missed out a lot in many of our workspaces. So I'll touch on those later on down the line. Accessibility is not a quick fix issue. Oftentimes you'll get businesses just throwing money at it, putting a band-aid solution on it, and then later on down the line, fighting cases and trying not to get sued. And I know you Americans love to get sued, and you love suing. So prioritizing accessibility can actually mitigate those circumstances, and it's important that it's part of the whole development process and not just as a last-minute quick fix. Speaking of suing and money and revenue, there is actually a great business case, and although I don't like to lead with this, I think in the world that we live in today where everyone's driven by money, it's important that we acknowledge this. So over across the pond in the UK, the total spending power of families with at least one disabled person in the UK comes up to about £274 billion a year. And that is set to go up when the consensus results come out in 2024. That's just the average. It's definitely way more given the pandemic and how more people have been affected by the lack of accessibility. And over here in the US, bigger state, bigger disability groups and activists, the spending power of the disabled community on average in the US is estimated at $8 trillion. That's about 2 trillion Happy Meals, if you want to put it into perspective. So there is clearly a lot of revenue to be made when businesses prioritize accessibility. In fact, in the UK, about 75% of disabled consumers actually walk away from a business because of poor customer service linked to their accessibility. So, how does web accessibility and integrity come into all of this? You know, as a developer, as designers, as product managers, we hear about accessibility floating around and we're sort of reluctant to implement it, but part of really taking accessibility seriously is understanding that when you design with dignity and integrity, your products become better. Your quality of communication and leadership become better. And so integrity, the practice of being honest and showing consistent, meaningful changes and iteration, definitely helps you in terms of whatever position you're in a society, in a workplace, or even just as an individual. So, what does building with integrity and prioritizing accessibility look like? It shows collective care, empathy, boundaries, advocacy, and commitment. And I'll take you through a few examples using my favorite thing in the world, memes. So, show of hands, how many of you use subtitles when you're watching something, whether on YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, whatever? Great. Keep your hand up if you cannot live without using subtitles in your videos. Great. And guess what? Either way, all of you are provided with choices. And that's another aspect of accessibility that we need to understand as developers, as leaders, as product managers, as consumers. Accessibility facilitates choice so that no one misses out, regardless of how you use the web or how you use any sort of digital product. Now, as you can see, the director of Parasite, he talks about how accessibility opened up the language barrier and allowed for his own movie, which he spent years trying to get out there, opened up audiences and allowed people like us to access Korean cinematography. And he says, and he laughs and makes a joke about how a small 1-inch tall barrier can really open up your world in the creative and film space. So, speaking of subtitles, I'm going to touch on how actually incorporating captions in my own work changed the course of my career and led me to where I am today as a better developer, as a better founder, as a better leader and community advocate. And I'm going to tell you how you guys can practically implement this for yourselves, regardless of what your role is. So, during the pandemic, I decided that I'm a bit bored. I want to do something to document my journey. My previous industry before I switched to tech, actually funny enough, was the film industry. And I actually did get to work with a few Paralympic athletes on some shows. And part of what I was doing as an assistant producer and screen editor was thinking about accessibility, and I just didn't know it. However, when I switched into the tech industry, I wanted to document that from my bootcamp journey to things I'm learning in my career and things I want to learn. And so I initially started off with just having subtitles because like me and many of you, you all just said that you love watching stuff with subtitles. So during the pandemic, I decided to do the same. I don't like to watch videos without subtitles, and I decided to start my own channel. And what started off as me just loving subtitles ended up opening up a whole world for the deaf community in the UK to access my content and actually understand what the tech industry is like. And so what ended up happening, and this is the bridge between bare minimum to actually beginning to advocate, was when I found out the deaf community were watching my channel and they were really intrigued about different tech careers, I decided to pair up with a few of them and give them an opportunity to not only be immersed in my journey and be immersed in what the tech industry can offer them, as well as other career paths, but also find a way for them to get equity and an opportunity to actually have their voices heard. So I paired up with my team members, Jefta and Sarah, who are both doing amazing things in their own right, but were constantly overlooked, and decided to ensure that all my videos had British Sign Language. Now, that was a complicated process in the sense that I had to understand their way of communication, what their world around content looked like, and they were trying to understand how I was relaying information. But what happened was, when we both became in sync and we streamlined that process, not only did we open up this content to so many deaf people across the UK, we actually realized that there's an opportunity to decrease the language barrier between people who don't have English as their first language, but also find different ways to get other disability groups involved in learning about tech. And through that, we work together to start bringing these people into these decision-making rooms and eventually advocate for them. So what started off as an accident and me just loving subtitles ended up being a whole community movement where not only are the disabled community represented, but they have a seat at the table to start making decisions and to start being involved in the content creation process. So that's just a bit of a summary of how I did it as a content creator. Now, let's say we're in the workplace. You know, we're all trying to work in agile methodologies, or at least pretending to, and there's all these different roles and different titles to constantly navigate and find ways to ship a product, test it, iterate over it, and it can be very difficult to explain how accessibility feeds into that. So this is my way of understanding where accessibility fits in the process, and the cool thing with accessibility is the earlier you start, the less problems you have, and for a client, the less budget they have to waste on trying to fix things as a last-minute solution. So ideation, planning and testing, sharing with the community, because a lot of the feedback that you can save time on getting towards the end can actually be picked up on when you're building in public, when you're building with your community, externally or internally, and then documenting it. Oftentimes, people want to make all these fancy changes, but they won't document it, so nobody else can actually learn from it. And documenting already as a developer, as a tester, in any part of the development cycle is already important, because you don't want to give someone else a headache later on. And that's where you make facilitating, adapting and updating your product cycle better, and it makes more room to implement and improve on it. So, leading to this, when you prioritize accessibility, you make room for collective care, room for everyone to benefit, because nobody misses out on accessibility. You put yourself in a position where you can lead positive, meaningful, and lucrative change, because guess what, guys? Accessibility is also part of DEI. And you can be a leader and authoritative voice in promoting that change in a way that is meaningful for the community you're advocating for and for yourself, so nobody actually loses out. So I would like to wrap up by saying, if you are someone who is considering trying to implement accessibility for yourself, think about the world around you and how you navigate it. And think about the different ways in how your world would look like if you didn't have things like subtitles, if you didn't have things like descriptions to help you summarize things, if you didn't have buildings that you could, access freely. The whole point of accessibility is for as many people as possible to engage with the world around them. And on the web, while everything's developing and expanding, we can't leave one of the largest minorities in the world behind. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you found that useful.